Welcome back, everyone, to this breakout session. We're looking forward to it. I hope you've had the opportunity to have a little bit of a physical activity break, some refreshments, and some fresh air so that you're ready to go again. My name is Lynne Feehan. I'm the Knowledge Translation Lead at the BC Support Unit, and I will be the host, but more just the backseat driver because Corinne's going to actually be taking control of this presentation soon. We also have Justin from the support unit, our communications expert, and all help us sort out all our problems kind of guy. He's also going to be monitoring the chat and letting people and addressing any problems as we come forward. So I'm just going to start with this very, very brief reminder that the panel today will be an actual panel presentation, even though it's presented in the session as it's 3 separate abstracts. We've had the opportunity in the last sort of couple days or so to refurbish this into a little bit more of a panel, because all of these abstracts are from the Foundry Project. And so Corinne is the research manager, director, can't remember exact title, but she'll introduce herself with this project. We'll be leading a shared conversation. The first 10 minutes will give you a little bit of background, and then followed by 3 presentations, and we hope an interesting and lively discussion about this incredible project that and the work that these guys are doing. So with that said, just a quick reminder that this is being recorded, that including to being recorded, so it will be available on our website after the session. Similarly, the slides from the slide deck will be available to everyone after the slide deck. And in addition to the recordings, anything that's entered in the chat that's to everybody also gets captured. So if you want to be, access to the specific slide deck or want to share your personal information or connections and what you're looking for, please enter it in the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that and making sure that we follow up with everybody. So that, getting the housekeeping out of way, I will pass the mic and the session on to Corinne. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lynne. And if it's all right, I'm just going to take a quick second here to start sharing my screen. Can everyone see that? Just a thumbs up. Wonderful. So yes, thank you and welcome everyone to this panel. I know our team is really excited to share some of the work we are doing on engaging young people with lived experience of substance use and their parents and caregivers in really applied research projects that are aimed at improving experiences and outcomes of substance use services in community. So as Lynne mentioned, my name is Corinne, and I'm joined today by my team members and colleagues, Elena, Anurata, Chantel, Haley, Joe, and Roxanne. So we're quite a host today, and we'll share a bit more about ourselves as we dive into our specific panel topics. But before we begin, we'd like to start our panel in a good way. So our team wanted to acknowledge that we are uninvited guests working and living on the traditional unceded territories of many diverse, strong Indigenous nations and peoples from across what we now call British Columbia. And we're incredibly grateful to these nations who allow us to be on their land and who make it possible for us to gather together for this event today. So we thought we would start by sharing a bit about the organization we represent, Foundry, and I know there's lots of Foundry folks in the audience, so you'll be able to catch anything I miss. But we wanted to share a bit about Foundry and why engagement is such an important part of what we do. So for those who are not familiar, Foundry is a provincial initiative that provides integrated health and social services to young people and their families across the province of BC. And we do that through community-based Foundry centers, as well as our relatively recently launched virtual care service. And so we work to provide a youth and family-centered, safe, non-judgmental service environment and experience. And Foundry is made possible by the support of a variety of sponsors and generous donors. And just to take a moment to acknowledge a few of those, the Government of British Columbia, Graham Beck Foundation, Michael Smith Foundation for Health Research, St. Paul's Foundation, who we work very closely with, and our host and home organization, Providence Healthcare. So Foundry's vision is really to transform access to services for young people and their families in this province, and that would absolutely not be possible without centering young people and their families in that transformation process. And so I'm going to hand it off to Roxanne now to speak a bit more to what engagement looks like at Foundry.
Thanks so much, Corinne. Yeah, so Foundry really values youth and families as partners because they recognize that their voices is really key to create meaningful and sustainable change to improve services as well as service experiences. And so the purpose of youth and family engagement at Foundry is really to incorporate the voices and perspectives of those with lived experience in everything that we do. And it provides a way for youth and families to really inform and shape service delivery. And it also ensures that Foundry centers, as well as provincial initiatives, reflect the values of youth and families. And it also creates opportunities for youth and families to become champions and leaders in their own communities. You can change the slide, Corinne. And engagement is so important in the context of substance use, especially. And so this presentation is going to focus on two of our substance use related projects, which both aim to improve substance use services, experiences, and outcomes for youth and families. And the first is called the Experience Project, and this presentation will focus on our youth engagement for this project. And the second is called the Improving Treatment Together Project, which will focus on youth engagement as well as parent and caregiver engagement. And so we'll spend 10 minutes on each of these three presentation topics, beginning with team introductions and acknowledgements, followed by a brief overview of each project, our engagement methods, lessons learned, and next steps. And then that'll be followed by a 20-minute panel discussion. So I'll dive right in. So we'll be presenting on our youth engagement methods for the Experience Project. So my name's Roxanne, and I am a settler living and working on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. I'm a research coordinator for the Experience Project as well as the Improving Treatment Together Project. And I'll pass it on to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Roxanne. My name is Anurada, and I use she and her pronouns, and I'm a youth research assistant with the Experience Project as well.
Thanks, Anurada. My name's Haley Turnbull. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a research and evaluation associate for Foundry, where I live and work on the traditional and unceded territories of the Syilx-speaking people in the Okanagan region. Oh, and I'm assisting with the evaluation activities for this project.
Thanks. And I also just wanted to acknowledge Sarah Irving, who has been leading the youth engagement piece for this project, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. So the Experience Project is a collaboration between Foundry Central Office and Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, and it's being funded by Health Canada under their Substance Use and Addiction Program. And the project aims to improve substance use services for youth, as well as better support peer support workers who provide peer support services to youth with lived and living experience of substance use. And to achieve this, we'll be conducting a series of focus groups and interviews with youth who have lived and living experience of substance use to learn about their experience accessing services and what's important to them. And we'll also be conducting focus groups with peer support workers to understand what their experiences have been providing peer support and how to better support them in their role. And this information will be used to create new content for Foundry's youth peer support curriculum, and this will be used to train peer support workers at Foundry. Meanwhile, our Ontario partners will be developing a mental health and primary care clinician curriculum that will be shared with us and modified to include feedback from youth and peer support workers. And this project is really being led and informed by youth with lived experience. And so this presentation will focus on our youth engagement methods and learnings. So we first started by creating a youth engagement framework, which is a document that outlines the values we have in working alongside youth with lived experience and the approach that we were committed to in working with them. And so I pulled a piece from the framework, which is the core of practicing meaningful youth and family engagement from Foundry's perspective is nothing about us without us. And this is really a living document that we just refer back to on an ongoing basis throughout the project. And it is an important document as it was co-created with our project Youth Advisory. And this advisory is made up of youth with lived and lived experience of substance use. And the framework outlines what the project team and the youth have agreed upon before moving forward with project activities. And how we approached this was the project team wrote a first draft of the framework and sent it to youth before our first youth advisory meeting. And then we went through it together during the meeting and discussed it and acquired youth feedback on it. And and then the project team went back, made those changes and brought back the revised version to our youth advisory committee to make sure that it did accurately reflect their feedback. Then I'll pass it on to Anurata.
Thanks, Roxanne. So now I'll talk about the Youth for Youth Advisory Committee, which consisted of 14 members, youth peer support workers, and youth like myself who had lived experience. This advisory was such a crucial part of the project because we were able to inform every aspect and see our ideas come to life as we gave feedback. So the team really tried to make recruitment as low barrier as possible. So we were recruited through social media, and we didn't need to have any requirements other than having our lived experience. And this was to make sure that the opportunities really were given to youth who had this experience. So the advisory met bi-weekly, and we were engaged in all aspects of the project, including making the name and the logos, which you can see here on the bottom and on the top right. And we were also asked for continual feedback about how we wanted to be engaged in the project. So this led to further professional development, including like qualitative research training and cultural humility training as well. Another one of those opportunities, next slide, was to be hired on as a youth research assistant to co-facilitate focus groups for the study. So we were allocated additional funds for these positions within the project budget, which included recruiting participants, reviewing the study material, developing the questions, running practice sessions, and just being fully integrated within the larger team. Again, the only experience that we needed was our lived experience. So this made the position very easily integrated within our existing role with the advisory.
Thanks, Anurata. So I'll talk now a little bit about the engagement process and how it relates to the evaluation of the project. So we really looked at evaluation as a very good way to ask for feedback about the youth engagement process as well as the project itself. So to do that, we administered anonymous surveys at various time points to request feedback from youth participants. We designed these surveys based on the youth engagement framework that Roxanne spoke about a few slides before this one. Basically so that we were incorporating the voice of the youth into the evaluation process. We approached evaluation in this way because we thought it was important to seek feedback in a meaningful way from young people who are participating in this project. And part of this was by creating a safe space for young people by making those surveys anonymous. So the way that the project has worked up until this point is that the advisory and the youth for you and the research assistants have worked really, really closely with the project team. So it was important to us to make sure that young people felt comfortable sharing both positive and constructive feedback. And we got some really great results from that. And we're very fortunate that our advisory group and the research assistants are just so wonderful and insightful. Another part of this was and continues to be reflecting the feedback back to young people, as well as taking concrete steps to correct or address any critical feedback that we received. So the way that we sort of approached it in terms of like a process is that we, as an evaluation team, so I attended a meeting, one of the Youth for Youth meetings, just to be introduced to the group, to sort of have a friendly face to who was sending them the surveys. The surveys were sent online, and 2 survey reminders were sent to young people, as well as setting a due date. The action plan was drafted and then sent to young people, which addressed the feedback that they gave us. And then we asked the research assistants separate specific questions to get input on their participation in the project activities. And there were a few lessons learned along the way, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But one of those things was we realized sort of recently that there was a lack of meaningful engagement for planning evaluation activities. So we're working on addressing those things now.
Thanks, Haley. Yeah, so definitely came up with some challenges throughout the process. So one of the things youth on our team highlighted was that there was really a lack of diversity within our project team, and that youth participants who identify as people of color might not feel comfortable sharing their experiences accessing substance use services within our team through these focus groups. And so to address this, we provided youth with the option to take part in BIPOC-specific focus groups, which will be co-facilitated by 2 of our youth research assistants who identify as BIPOC. And we also hired a note taker and a peer support worker who identify as BIPOC to make sure that these spaces are safe for everybody. Another challenge was also just getting ethics approval in a timely manner, just given the pandemic and summer submissions. And so this meant that timelines had to be pushed, and we had to coordinate with our youth research assistant schedules, which changed during September when school's starting. So that was definitely a challenge. We had originally hired 6 youth research assistants. However, 2 of them, their situations changed. So we were grateful that we had actually allocated additional funds to hire more youth research assistants because now we still have 4 youth research assistants on board for the project. We also ran into some challenges just scheduling meetings with the larger team, just given our workday schedules, and some of the youth work during the day. And so we tried to address this by just sending doodle polls in advance of the meetings to make sure that it works with everyone's schedules. Another challenge was just some communication challenges without having a specific point person in charge of all the communication, especially since we were providing our youth advisory committee with a lot of different opportunities that were being led by different folks. And so sometimes different folks on our project team would contact the youth. And so once we received that feedback, we made sure that all communications went through one point person, so it wasn't as confusing. And finally, our youth research assistants also identified that it could be really oppressive having to go into a police station to get a police information check for their role, since they'll be working with young people, especially if they've had negative experiences with police. And so we're making efforts to try to change those current policies so that the police information checks can be processed through our organization and paid for that way, and so that it's not onerous on youth. Moving forward, our project team is committed to anti-racism work within our project team as well as within the larger Foundry organization. And we're really grateful for our youth for having pointed out some of these barriers within the project and supporting us in trying to find solutions to create safer spaces. We've also created a standard operating procedure for youth engagement, which incorporates youth feedback throughout this project, which we'll continue to update, and it'll be useful for this project as well as other Foundry projects. And finally, moving forward, we are also going to make sure that all project planning activities are informed by youth on our team, including our evaluation planning.
Thanks, Roxanne. Before we start the next presentation, just a friendly reminder to all of our panel members to just be sure to explain acronyms when used. So I think the last one that might have been used was BIPOC, so referring to Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Corinne. So Hi, everyone. We'll move on to the next presentation, which is on our Improving Treatment Together project. So just switching to the next project here, but along a similar thread of youth engagement and specifically our evaluation of youth engagement. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Elena Ewert, and I'm grateful to be a settler living and working on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm the evaluation lead at Foundry Central Office, so helping to lead the evaluation strategy for the Improving Treatment Together project. And Jo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Elena. Hi, everyone. My name is Jo Lam. I use the pronoun she, her, hers, and I'm the Research and Evaluation Associate with Foundry. I'm calling in today as an uninvited guest on the unceded and traditional territories of Coast Salish peoples, including Musqueam, Stalo, Chemainus, and Tsleil-Waututh nations.
Thanks, Jo. So as I mentioned, the next two presentations will explore findings from the Improving Treatment Together project. So specifically, this presentation will explore our evaluation of youth engagement in the ITT project, or the Improving Treatment Together project. Next slide. Thanks, Corinne. So I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the contributions of our community champions and partners, as well as our project funders, without whom this work would not be possible. A special thank you to Tony, Christina, and Melissa from Prince George, Chantal, Jen, and Mel from Victoria, Sylvia and Grace from Vancouver, and Ben, CJ, and Jordy from Kelowna. Next slide. Thanks, Corinne. So the next two presentations will speak to our team's experience working on this project. So I'll just give a brief background on the project now. The Improving Treatment Together project, and I'll refer to it as the ITT project moving forward, is a collaboration between the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addictions, Foundry, and Alberta Health Services, funded by a private anonymous donor and Health Canada. The ITT project aims to improve experiences and outcomes of opioid use treatment services for young people in community by co-creating youth-centered, evidence-informed health services interventions alongside young people ages 12 to 24, their parents and caregivers, and service providers in communities in BC and Alberta. So in BC, the project team has partnered closely with our 4 Foundry communities, without whom this work would not be possible. And they're on your screen. So Foundry Prince George, Foundry Victoria, Foundry Kelowna, and Foundry Vancouver Granville. So in phase 1 of the project, which just concluded, their community-based co-design workshops were hosted with each of the 3 key stakeholder groups in the center of your screen there, to help identify needs for opioid use treatment services, as well as brainstorm solutions that would help address those needs. A total of 9 workshops were held across the 4 partner Foundry communities. 2 were held with young people, 3 with parents and caregivers, and 4 with service providers. The findings from these workshops informed a shared decision-making process that led to the selection of 3 of the co-designed initiatives. So the first initiative was a virtual guide from a youth perspective on the experience and process of obtaining opioid use agonist therapy. The second was a handbook for parents by parents of young people with lived experience, providing insights into their experiences and relevant information supports related to their young person's substance use. And the third was a youth-led youth services appraisal, supporting services to identify areas of improvement for cultural safety and inclusivity. Phase 2 just started in September 2020, and this will involve the co-creation and implementation of these prototypes in each of the partner communities. And the evaluation of these project activities and outcomes is ongoing, and parallel work is also occurring in Alberta by our partners at Alberta Health Services. So that's it for the project background. And we'll start off with Jo presenting on our evaluation of youth engagement in phase 1 of the project, and then we'll hand it off to our colleagues who will share more about their experience engaging parents and caregivers of youth who use opioids in the ITT project. So Jo, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Elena. So for the ITT project, there were 4 youth team members involved, 1 in each of the 4 communities. They were involved in the planning and co-facilitating of all of the co-design workshops. And some youth team members disclosed having lived or living experience, but that was not a requirement to participate. In terms of why it's important, regional youth team members really brought comfort and local context and were critical to the success of the workshops. And meaningful youth engagement informs every aspect of this project, as well as with Foundry. Supporting and valuing young people as partners to the work is really fundamental to everything that we do. And youth team members themselves said that they appreciated the ability to get formal research and facilitation training. In terms of how we approached engagement with youth team members, they all sat at all of the planning tables, including the core study team, planning conversations with the center leadership. The project team was conscientious about everyone having voices in those spaces at the same time, so it wasn't like leadership had a head start. In terms of communication, any job descriptions, contracts, and emails were all in youth-friendly language and really tried to avoid research jargon. All of the project documents had a simplified version. So for instance, a project charter became a 2-page project overview, and the team discussed commitment, roles, responsibilities to really manage expectations in terms of what the project could achieve. And a debrief was done after every workshop with one-on-one discussions on an ad hoc basis. And youth team members were compensated through honoraria. Foundry strives to compensate youth fairly for the wealth of knowledge and expertise that they bring to the work. Next slide, please. Thank you. We also had youth participants. So 2 youth co-design workshops were held in 2 different communities with a total of 13 participants overall. Young people described their experience with substance use services, identified needs or improvement opportunities in their community, and developed prototypes that would address the identified needs. Again, in terms of why it's important, meaningful youth engagement provides opportunities to young people with lived and living experience to really inform their care and the future of substance use services in BC. In terms of how we approached engagement with the participants, recruitment was done through the relationships community champions and youth team members had in the community. And while there were no strict rules around abstinence or sobriety, the study team members consenting the youth had to assess whether they were in a place to understand, comprehend, and confide in consent. And we use similar Foundry practices when it comes to reimbursing participants with honoraria. In terms of the communication, the team tried to manage expectations in terms of what the project could achieve, what the research process would entail for participants, and where their information was going. Next slide, please. Thank you. In terms of the evaluation for the youth engagement for the project, we collected feedback on the engagement process, methods, and outcomes. And it was important for young people to have a safer way to let us know what's working, how we can improve, and to show that we're listening to their feedback by making these changes. In terms of the evaluation for youth participants, the public and patient evaluation tool participant questionnaire was adapted and administered after the co-design workshops. And for youth team members, the PEAT project questionnaire was adapted and administered, and then in-depth semi-structured interviews were also conducted. Next slide, please. In terms of the findings and considerations for engaging youth team members, one learning is that the project team can co-learn with youth team members and bring them in earlier during early methodology development, as they had really great feedback around the format and planning of the workshops. Youth team members also voiced having difficulty explaining materials that changed too close to the date of the workshop. The preferred method would be if they were to send the materials earlier in the state that they were in, with a warning that it would change so there's more time to understand and prepare. Another learning is that video meetings were preferred over phone meetings. Over the phone, youth team members found it was confusing and awkward sometimes to really identify who was speaking. And youth team members found that participants often drifted back to their personal stories during prototyping and would have preferred more workshop facilitation training on how to address conflicts and how to reel conversations back in when things got off topic. In terms of moving forward, to mitigate power dynamics, the project team really tried to educate themselves on how to create safer spaces, ensure that youth team members were authentically engaged, and tried to communicate clear roles and responsibilities, and really apply to youth team members' feedback. The project team was also cognizant that youth team members weren't necessarily coming from a research background, as that wasn't a requirement of recruitment. So folks had one-on-one sessions on where the methodologies came from, ethics training, stuff like why we need consent forms. And youth team members found that having varied ways to learn was really important. Most of the materials for the workshop were sent a month beforehand for folks to review alone. Materials were also discussed as a group, and there was also an in-person meeting the day before the workshop with the project team to go over the materials again. So the quote on the slide is from a youth team member. "I didn't feel pressure to have to do stuff and knew I had people to fall back on if I didn't feel able or willing to facilitate certain parts. I felt better knowing I had people to lean on and take over if needed." So across the board, many youth team members appreciated that their involvement was flexible and dependent on their comfort level. Next slide, please. In terms of the findings for engaging youth participants, Youth participants in the first workshop mentioned having PowerPoints, handouts, and the facilitator at the front of the room made it feel like a classroom environment, which really contributed to a power dynamic. So the quote at the bottom from the research team, we try to break down power dynamics from the classroom environment by sitting in a circle, documenting together instead of for, and replacing PowerPoints and handouts with conversations and more one-on-one engagement with youth participants. So another learning is that the full day, 8-hour co-design workshops were too long. In the second youth workshop, it was shortened to 4 hours. And even then, you said it was too draining. Folks needed more breaks and discussion time and weren't able to complete a feedback survey because the day was too full. And another learning that came up was a lack of Indigenous voices, particularly in smaller communities where young people may be more transient and may not have the same access to resources. It's not something that was touched upon in all of the workshops, but participants had mentioned a need to recognize that we're in a settler context and there needs to be more space created for Indigenous families, young people, and service providers to participate in research. So going forward, there needs to be shorter youth workshops with a need to refine what the critical pieces of the workshop are. For some young people, Wi-Fi access can be limited, so having posters and flyers that contain all of the information people will need to show up would be really helpful going forward, and that planning on how to respond to triggering content is really helpful as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the findings for the overarching themes, a lesson learned was that youth engagement at multiple levels was critical to success. Youth team members, youth participants, and youth peer supporters all present at the day of the workshop was vital, as they all had unique insights around how to engage young people successfully that the project team said they would have never considered. Another thing that was critical was building trusting relationships with community champions who have existing relationships and working with them to engage young people before even getting into the same space together. So the quote on the screen is from a young youth team member. "My community has had an attitude of promising change and hope, but nothing actually happening. It's nice to have the hope for actual change." And I think the community prototype will be very helpful, and I'm very excited about it. So I'm now going to pass it off to Corinne, who'll share more about their experience of engaging parents and caregivers of youth on the ITT project.
Thank you so much, Jo. So yes, my name is Corinne. I am a settler living and working on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples in what we now call Vancouver. I am a member of the Foundry Central Office team based in Vancouver, and my role is to support research activities that happen across our Foundry network. I am also a proud member of the ITT project team, and as Jo mentioned, we'll be presenting on our project's engagement of parents and caregivers of young people who use opioids. I'd also like to acknowledge some of our project team members who are not with us on the panel today: Christina Catan, Una Fogarty, Jill Fairbank, and Dr. Sky Barbic, who I believe may be in the audience. I'd also like to give a shout out to Chantal Brassett, who is a member of our project team in Victoria at the community level, leading work there, and he will be joining us for the Q&A session after this presentation. So I don't want to rehash the beautiful overview that Elena and Jo just gave about the project, but just to reiterate, the purpose of the project is really about improving experiences and outcomes of community-based substance use services for young people who use opioids, as well as their parents and caregivers and the service providers who work with them. And so of course, none of this work would be possible without having those folks directly involving and informing this process. My presentation will also focus on phase 1 activities, specifically the methods, findings, and lessons learned through our process of engaging parents and caregivers in those community-based co-design workshops that Elena and Jo referred to. So as already discussed, we have the pleasure and privilege of partnering closely with 4 Foundry centers. Of the 9 workshops that took place in phase 1, 3 of those were parent and caregiver workshops. So one of those was hosted in Prince George in November of last year. And we also hosted one in Vancouver and one in Victoria this past February. When thinking about our engagement methods for this project, I wanted to take the chance to highlight the role of our project structures and how they actually informed and facilitated our engagement. And so this project involves a national organization, CCSA, or the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, investing in the work of community-based initiatives. And so to make that connection from the national down to the community level, CCSA established a close partnership with Foundry, which in turn facilitated those critical community partnerships with our 4 communities and centers. For this project to actually succeed in maintaining meaningful and sustained community engagement, all of these project partners had to commit to ensuring that community priorities took precedent in guiding this work. At the end of the day, the community members who are our partners, youth, parents and caregivers, and service providers are the experts and the drivers behind this initiative. And one of the ways this was done was by supporting the movement of project resourcing and decision-making down to the local level wherever possible. Some examples of this include providing community partners with direct funding in the form of implementation grants, hiring community and provincial project team members, and by creating a local community project team that included members from all project levels, so national, provincial, and community. And this slide actually zeroes in on that local project structure. So these were the folks who planned and executed the workshops in each community. In the teal color, you see the project team members, which included staff from Foundry and CCSA, as well as the local youth team member that Joe was speaking about. In the gray, you have our Foundry Center leadership, who were critical for creating buy-in for the partnership and the project. I would like to highlight the role of the community champion who was part of that project team. These were typically a member of the local Foundry Center staff, and they were especially critical to the success of the parent and caregiver workshops. These were folks who had existing relationships with parent and caregiver networks and individuals in their communities, and were really trusted members of those communities. So they were important not only for generating interest and awareness of the workshops, but really for anticipating and planning for the needs of participants and in creating conditions of trust and safety starting even before the workshops took place. And then lastly, on the right, you see our community participants. And so these folks weren't involved in the planning process for the workshops, but the workshops themselves were a critical decision-making venue for this project. And just to acknowledge how and why that was, the workshops were designed by combining elements of community-based research and design thinking, specifically co-design methods, that really placed control of content creation and workshop outcomes in the hands of the workshop participants, while still ensuring that the facilitation supported folks to work through those design steps from understanding experiences to brainstorming ideas and actually designing tangible solutions in community. In planning for the parent and caregiver workshops, specific considerations were paid to things like the timing and location of the workshop, creating and ensuring a safe and supported environment for parents and caregivers, and in particular on that note, around the facilitation of the understanding experiences component of the workshop. This was the first activity we undertook as a group on that day, and so we had to think very carefully about the conditions we wanted to create and what had to be in place in order to dive into those very meaningful conversations, but challenging conversations. And the community champions and peer support present at the workshops were critical for that. So I know I'm running out of time here, but I want to touch on the findings if I can, specifically the needs that came out from the parent and caregiver workshops. There was a total of 27 parents and caregivers who participated across the 3 communities. And when we looked at the specific needs that emerged from each of these communities, we found that the themes were actually quite similar in many ways across the workshops and communities. A couple that I'd like to emphasize, so the first is empathy, which also included the concepts of trust, safety, understanding. Parents and caregivers wanted to see this from service providers first and foremost, but also from other folks in their lives, friends, relatives, and neighbors, as well as society more broadly in terms of breaking down and busting stigma. More supports for parents and families, including siblings, is also a common theme, and that was with everything from system navigation to things like respite and mental health supports. And maybe also just emphasizing education and informational resources for families. So everything from what to know about the system and how to navigate it, to how to support your young person in their journey with substance use and what to expect. In terms of our evaluation of their experiences of the workshops, we've gone back to our survey data to highlight a few of the findings that have really helped inform our engagement practices and approaches in this next phases of the project. So 21 of the 27 parents and caregivers actually completed these surveys. And in this graph, what we've tried to show here in the middle, you see those two solid green bars, which show that all of those folks strongly agreed that their views were heard and that they were able to express their views freely. And that was a really reassuring finding that I think spoke to the effort put in to create a safe and supported environment. Where we start to see some divergence in responses is around the representativeness of those voices. You see that in the top two questions. And so that speaks, I think, to a need for more diversity in those spaces. These are some quotes we pulled out that we think sort of reflect that safety of sharing and value of voices, which you folks can read as well. Where we saw the most divergence in survey responses was in questions related to the expected impact and outcome of the workshops. So we're still seeing a majority agreeance from participants in terms of those green and gray areas on the graph, the strongly agree and agree. But where we start to see more divergences in questions related to impact beyond the scope of the workshops or the ITT project context. So for example, at the top there you see, as a result of my participation, I feel hopeful about the future of opioid services for young people in BC. And we see much less folks selecting the strongly agree response and some neutral responses and even one blank. And this was reflected in the open-ended responses that we captured in the survey. So I'll just highlight one here. When asked what could be improved about the workshop, a Victoria parent and caregiver said, more than just a we hope, that this information will be used. A commitment from policy changers to use this data would be inspiring. So how has this informed our lessons learned and what we're doing in our next phases of the project? I think first and foremost, a commitment to action, and to action beyond the scope of just the workshops and even the project itself, and thinking about how we leverage our relationships with policy and government to have these conversations. And with that, the continued engagement of community members into these next phases, so that they're not just seeing this change, but that they're actually part of that action and our voices at those tables. I also just wanted to highlight the role of the local peer support and the community champion in creating safe spaces and establishing that trust. And I think that was critical to what we saw in those survey responses, and a need for more diverse representation in our engagement going forward. And to do that, investing in engagement at the local level. So just a quick shout out to the next phase of the project. As Elena mentioned, one of the prototypes that's moving forward actually came out of the Victoria Parent and Caregiver Workshop. It's a parent and caregiver handbook for parents by parents, being co-led by Chantal and Roxanne, who are both on the panel today. And you see on this slide just a continuation of that cross-organizational and community-based project team structure that includes co-design members, so parents and caregivers from community. All right, so that's it from me. I think at this point in time, Lynn, I will stop sharing my screen and we'll have the panel join back for the question and answer period.
Great, thank you, Corinne. I mispronounced your name at the beginning, I apologize. Don't take it too personally, I always get my kids' names wrong too, so.
I never do.
Yeah, so anyway, thank you to everyone for an excellent presentation and overview of the amazing work that you guys have done with the Foundry Project. And it's nice to see this go through, and having attended the session last year at our patient conference in person and listened to your session and just see that how you've already grown and transitioned over this last year and really completing a lot of the work in phase one that was still in progress last year, I think is a testament to how much work and time and effort that you guys are putting into this. So thank you very much for that. And I'm not seeing any specific questions in the chat box, but I just want to, I'm gonna throw you one that maybe you weren't necessarily expecting, but I think it does speak to the time of what we're in. And because much of your work is about community based participation, and a lot of your work is face-to-face. And your workshops were face-to-face, and all of the meetings. And I'm just wondering if you guys can speak to how you're, I'll bring in the pivot word, how are you pivoting in these times to continue this incredible work that you're doing at such a fast pace, and really trying to engage with your community partners in a way that doesn't allow, you know, maybe what does a virtual safe space look like? And if you can just comment on how you've transitioned would be, I think, really helpful for us to hear as well. So I'll open up to anyone that's willing to take that curveball from me.
Tempted to put Roxanne on the spot here, because this was a huge story of the Experience project to date so far, as well as the ITT phase 2 work.
For sure. So for the Experience project, it's definitely been a struggle, just because we're talking about such serious topics of conversation like accessing substance use services, and we are doing this with youth. And so in order to create safer spaces over Zoom, what we've done is we've gotten some peer support workers to support the focus groups. And so if a youth needs support on the spot, they can go into a breakout room with a peer support worker and provide peer support on the spot, or help them access a service with them while they're online with them. It's not ideal, but it's kind of what we've tried to do to improve those spaces, as well as just, you know, being able to contact them if they log off unexpectedly, and follow up with them to make sure that everyone's safe. For ITT, yeah, it's definitely kind of been a bummer not being able to meet in person. So for the parent handbook that I'm working on with Chantal, we're just doing it over Zoom, and you know, the first meeting, it was kind of a struggle because there's just so many voices in one room, but really using the breakout room feature to be able to talk in smaller groups and then coming back together to talk. But yeah, they've just been really great, and Jen is also a colleague of Chantal's, has been supporting those parent handbook meetings as well, just to make sure that parents have support, and again, if they have to leave the meeting, that's totally fine, but we check in with them to make sure that everyone's doing okay. So yeah, not sure if anyone else has anything to add, or I missed anything. I'm
Chantal,
sure I have.
you wanted to add? No? I might just add, one of the things that isn't ideal is there's a lot of barriers, obviously, to engaging in online forums for folks, and particularly when we talk about some of the young people we're trying to work with in the space of substance use. And so we're troubleshooting with our Youth for Youth advisory, who have some fantastic ideas around how to connect with and support folks to access a virtual focus group or a virtual interview. And a lot of that involves working really closely with service providers and community who have strong relationships with those young people, and who can offer that support, and who can offer that technical equipment too if it's missing, and access to Wi-Fi, and access to a computer, or access to a phone. And so a lot of it relies still on those direct community relationships, and building those relationships as a project team.
Great, thank you. I think this is probably the similar experience that we can all relate to, but you know, it is difficult, and there's a lot when it comes to engagement, no matter who you're trying to engage with. We tend to think that the Zoom platform or virtual platforms are pretty barrier-free, but in fact they're not, and for many people, and particularly people that don't have access to Wi-Fi and all this great, incredible technology that we all take for granted. And you know, one of the things that we're learning, and I love the lessons learned that you're sharing with us, because we can all learn from these lessons, and it's the best lessons learned are from the learning by the mistakes that we've done. And one of the lessons that we've learned in our learning is that there's a lot of pre-prep work when you're engaging with anyone. It's not just about the technology. It's not just about how do you get access to Wi-Fi. And we often say that the engagement takes about twice as long, and you get about half as much done, because you know there's a lot to really support people to feel comfortable in an environment where you don't get that nuance and that sort of personal feedback. So this is, you know, it is a transition and challenge, and I'm glad to see that you guys are working through that, and hopefully the youth will help you work through some of these challenges in a way that's going to be quite helpful. Again, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I am going to ask.
There's one in the chat. There's a question in the chat.
Oh, I missed it.
But I can answer.
Perfect.
Hi. Are you able to hear me?
It was from Anita. Yeah. Hi, Anita.
Yeah. Hi.
Perfect,
Yeah. I was trying to type and it wouldn't. I was trying to send a longer message to Lynne, but it would only let me type like 3 words at a time. My name's Anita. I work for Fraser Health. I work in the library in Abbotsford, and we, except when it's COVID protocols, we have a mandate to serve patients and the public as well, which I really enjoy. And I'm just wondering whether, once the handbook is finished, is this something that would then just be handed out by people who are working with those families, or is this something that we're going to be able to, like, could I get a stack of 10 of them and have them available with my pamphlets in the library? What sort of level is it going to be produced at and intended for?
That's a great question. Oh, do you want to answer, Chantal?
I'll answer that. Well, to begin with, our sort of like our first try is going to be created at a local level in Victoria. And so it's going to be quite focused on like local resources here, and parents that live in this community, their experiences. And I think what we're hoping is that maybe out of it, it will kind of create a template that other communities could then take that and create something for their own community. That said, if a library in Abbotsford wanted to have a copy of our book from Victoria, like, that would be okay, and you know, like, that could be great, and I think people would still appreciate reading it, and there would be like lessons that are
cool.
that people could learn from.
Cool.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think like there's a lot of like just relatable stories in the handbook, and so I think it could be used in different communities, but then also having some kind of guide, like Chantal said, to if other communities wanted to create one, what that process was like. I think the parents have also highlighted that maybe having something online is also important because it's just more accessible. And so, but we're still kind of figuring out the details, whether we're going to have both options or, yeah. So we can definitely let you know when we roll it out.
Great. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I have one question that I think was common on both of your, or all 3 of your presentations, was you're struggling with the inclusion of a more diverse voice and perspectives in all of the work that you do. And I'm just wondering if you can speak to how you have any more ideas and ways that you think you might be able to extend some of that diversity in your work.
Yeah, I think as an organization, we're really exploring this question right now. We We have a new director of Indigenous Relations who's leading a strategic plan within our organization. And so I think the question is always, you know, that process is so critical and so important, but then also what actions do we need to be taking in the interim? We know these lessons are happening now and the impacts are happening now, and how do we marry those two approaches in parallel? So I think one of our lessons learned is our research program is still relatively young and nascent, and Foundry is still relatively young, but we need to be investing more in partnerships and in building relations with provincial First Nations and Indigenous organizations, which is work that's happening, but also at the community level, and figuring out how we walk alongside those organizations and not just leading this work, but learning from and engaging in reciprocal relationships with those communities to ensure that diversity and inclusion is part of the work that we're doing. I don't know if other folks wanted to add.
Just had one quick thing that we just learned through the Experience Project. So when we first did the recruitment, we really wanted to be like low barrier. So we didn't really ask folks like any questions about like how they identify. And so like kind of thinking back to it, like maybe having some kind of survey asking those questions to make sure that we did have a diverse representation of youth on our advisory could have been a way to make sure those voices are being heard. So yeah, that's something we kind of learned throughout the process.
Did anyone else have anything you wanted to add? I know there's a lot happening in this space right now. Yeah, and I think maybe part of what we know is it starts with our organization and increasing diversity and inclusion within our organization so that that's reflected out. And I think that's something that we have folks engaged in that work right now, but we've recognized it in our project team. And so it's about, once again, how do we create partnerships that help strengthen and increase the inclusivity of the work we're doing.
Great, thank you. And another piece that I really love about the work that you're doing is the integration of your research into your care practices. It's almost seamless in many ways, in that, and you're following very similar principles of inclusiveness and accessibility and respect, and including, you know, the people that are receiving services. Informing not only the research that you're, you know, some of these focus groups, but it's really meaningfully informing ultimately the services that you will be providing. And so that's a really nice, piece that I like again about the work that you're doing that well, and providing us the opportunity to learn from you. So I do appreciate that. And in just one quick last question is just related to we often forget about the evaluation piece, and we forgot that you actually need to plan the evaluation before you actually start. And I thought it was interesting that in some of your first work that you didn't engage the patient partner's perspective, patient or the youth partner's perspective in the evaluation. I'm wondering, was that because it was kind of the evaluation plan came a bit later, or it was just an oversight? Just a thought.
Such a great question, Lynn, and I'll let Haley speak to that. But to answer your question, I think part of our challenge was we're a relatively new team actually at Foundry. We have grown quite quickly over the last few months, and the evaluation planning started a little ways into the project, but it definitely is something that I think we could improve on, and really appreciate the feedback that's been shared today just for across our projects altogether. So Haley, I'm not sure if you wanted to jump in and just share a bit more and maybe how we're looking to use these lessons learned in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Elena. So I think context is important in this sort of situation, in that as we were sort of developing those early evaluation plans, in our brains, we were incorporating the youth voice by using the youth engagement framework that they co-created with the project team. And in the spirit of continuous learning and continuously seeking feedback, I took part of our evaluation plan and reflected it back to the young people who were part of the Youth for Youth Advisory, and just asked them for some feedback and if there was anything that sort of stood out to them or anything that they wanted to add. And just was blown away by the insight from this group of young people. So I left that meeting just shaking my head and like giving myself a slap on the wrist going, you silly, silly person. We should have been doing this from the beginning. So from sort of this point forward, we're looking to really incorporate that youth voice by looking to formally integrate a young person into our evaluation team and have their help sort of with the planning going forward. So Elena mentioned that we got involved a little bit late. And the nature of this project is that it's quite fluid and activities are changing as we go. So we're really looking forward to having a young person weigh in on some of those things as the project moves forward.
Great, thank you very much. It's just nice to know that you guys aren't as perfect as we always thought you were. No, no, I do. It is just a cognizant of time. I just do want to say thank you very much to all of the presenters. This was a very cohesive and well thought out and well presented overview of the work that you're doing, and I look forward to next year to find out where you've gone and more of the amazing things that you've done. And so again, everyone else, we're going to be moving now into the final plenary session. I know you're all feeling a little bit bagged and tired, but please join in. It'll be a very interesting discussion. And turn your computer screens off and make sure you stand and move around and keep everything moving as we wrap up this great day. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lynne. Thanks, everybody. Take care.